The sun was dropping toward the horizon when the old mechanic walked into the quiet canyon. He had come there only to look for old machine parts. People in nearby towns said the canyon still held broken mining tools, rusted carts, and pieces of old engines. For him, that meant useful metal he could repair and sell. He enjoyed working with his hands, fixing things others had thrown away. It gave him a strange kind of peace. He pushed his small cart through the narrow path, humming softly. The canyon was silent in a comforting way. A soft wind moved between the tall rock walls, carrying dust and the faint smell of dry plants. It was the kind of place where a person could be alone with their thoughts. He liked that dot, but that day, something felt different. He couldn't explain why. The air seemed unusually warm in some areas, almost like someone had lit a fire nearby. The ground showed long marks of heat, thin lines of black rock that looked almost burned. He stopped and crouched down to feel the ground, but it was cool. He stood up slowly, unsure what to think. Then, as he continued forward, he heard a faint sound echoing through the stone walls. It was so soft, he almost thought he imagined it. It didn't sound like a person or an animal he recognized. It was a mixture of a low rumble and a sad whimper. He froze where he stood. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. It made something twist in his chest. It wasn't the cry of a dangerous creature preparing to attack. It was the cry of something in pain or something scared. He wiped sweat from his forehead and took a careful step forward. His boots made a small crunch on the rocky ground. He stopped again, listening. The sound came once more, followed by tiny squeaks, almost like the noise small birds make when asking for food. His curiosity was stronger than his fear. He slowly followed the noise deeper into the canyon. The walls narrowed until only a thin opening led into an old mining tunnel. The entrance was half collapsed, covered in rocks and dust. He hesitated, unsure if the tunnel was safe. But the noise inside grew clearer, and he felt a pull he couldn't ignore. He slipped inside, moving gently to avoid making loud sounds. The air inside the tunnel was warm, much warmer than outside. The deeper he walked, the stronger the warmth became. At first, he thought maybe there was leftover mining equipment still producing heat, though that made little sense. Then he saw a glow. Not the bright glow of fire, but a soft orange shimmer reflecting off the dusty tunnel walls. His heartbeat quickened. He moved closer, careful, alert. When he reached the turn in the tunnel, he slowly peeked around the corner. What he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. There, lying on the ground in the wide center of the cavern, was a giant creature he had only heard about in old stories told by travelers. A dragon large, tired, and clearly in pain rested against a fallen boulder. Her scales shimmered faintly, the warm glow coming from her body. Her wings were folded tightly, almost protectively, and her breathing was uneven. But what shocked him even more were the small shapes gathered around her. Tiny dragons' hatchlings, no bigger than large dogs, huddled close to their mother. They chirped softly, pressing themselves against her side. Every few seconds, the mother lifted her head weakly to nudge them, as if telling them everything was all right, even though it clearly wasn't. The mechanic stood completely still. He knew dragons were rare, almost never seen by people anymore. Most had left human lands long ago. He also knew they usually stayed far away unless something forced them to come near. He slowly took a step back, thinking he should leave. This was none of his business. A human had no place standing near a dragon family. But as he started to turn, he heard a sudden, sharp sound, a pained breath from the mother dragon. She tried to shift her weight and let out a soft chuff of discomfort. The hatchlings cried louder, confused and scared. He turned back. His eyes dropped to her legs. Even from a distance, he could see something was very wrong. Her front legs lay twisted at unusual angles. Her claws dug weakly at the dirt, as if she had tried many times to stand, but failed. The area around the joints looked swollen, and the bones didn't align the way they should. She must have fallen hard or been hurt by something worse near her, or broken pieces of metal. Small chains, rusted spikes, and heavy clamps lay scattered like someone had thrown them away in a hurry. The pieces made him frown. They didn't look like natural debris. They looked like tools people might use to trap something large. He swallowed hard. It didn't take much imagination to understand what had happened. Someone had trapped her, maybe to capture her, maybe for something worse, but when they realized she was too heavy or too dangerous to move, they must have left her there, injured and unable to walk. The hatchlings could not protect themselves. They were thin, small, and frightened. The mechanic felt anger rise inside him, not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet kind that made his jaw tighten. No creature deserved to be left like that, but he forced himself to stay calm. A dragon was still a dragon. Even injured, even desperate, she could be dangerous if she thought he was a threat. He slowly raised his hands to show he held nothing. His voice came out soft, almost a whisper. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'm just looking. I won't hurt you." The mother dragon's eyes opened slightly. They were bright and sharp even through the pain. She watched him closely, her pupils narrowing. Her chest rose and fell with careful breaths. She didn't growl, but she didn't look relaxed either. The hatchlings pressed closer to her, their little bodies trembling. He stayed still, letting her look at him for as long as she needed. After a moment, he reached into his bag very slowly and took out a small metal flask. He opened the cap and held it out in front of him. "It's only water," he said softly. The mother's nostrils flared. She sniffed the air and let her head rest back down. She didn't push the hatchlings away or raise her wings. She didn't approve or reject him. But she didn't ward him off either. It was a small sign, but he understood. He placed the flask gently on the ground, a few feet away from her, and stepped back to show he wasn't forcing it on her. One of the hatchlings, the smallest one, took a tiny step toward the flask, but the mother gave a quiet sound, nudging it back. She was still nervous, still unsure. The mechanic sighed softly. He couldn't blame her. Trust didn't come easily, especially for a creature who had clearly suffered. Still, he moved a little closer, step by step, never fast, never threatening. When he reached the point where the warm glow of the mother's scales brushed against his boots, he crouched down, staying lower than her head so he wouldn't appear like a challenger. He looked again at her legs and felt his stomach sink. Both were hurt in ways he couldn't ignore. He wasn't a doctor, not even close. He fixed machines, broken engines, rusted gears, old steel frames. But bones weren't much different from metal pieces in some ways. They needed alignment. They needed structure. They needed support. And right now, the dragon had none of those things. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I can try to help," he whispered. "But only if you let me." Her glowing eyes watched him with a mixture of pain, exhaustion, and a strange, quiet understanding. She didn't speak. Dragons didn't communicate that way with humans. But something in the slow blink she gave felt like permission. He nodded once. Slowly, respectfully. At that moment, something shifted between them. The fear was still there. The danger was still there. But a thin line of fragile trust began to form, as delicate as a thread. The mechanic knew helping her would not be easy. It would take time, patience, and courage. But he also knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after seeing the pain she carried, and the tiny lives depending on her. And so, with a deep breath and steady hands, he prepared himself for whatever came next. The mechanic sat on the dusty ground for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. The mother dragon's quiet acceptance still surprised him. Every story he had heard about dragons made them sound fierce and untouchable, creatures who stayed far from human paths. Yet here she was, injured and weak, watching him with tired eyes, while her small hatchlings pressed close to her warm body. He understood he had only gained a tiny bit of trust, and even that was fragile. One wrong move could break it. But he also felt a strange sense of responsibility. If he didn't help her, nobody else would come into this lonely tunnel. She and the little ones would stay trapped in the dark, unable to leave, unable to find food or safety. He slowly pulled off his old leather backpack and opened it. Inside were tools, small ones, meant for machines, not dragons. But some could still be useful. He took out a cloth, a small bottle of water, and a few metal pieces he had collected from the canyon earlier that day. When he glanced up again, he saw the hatchlings watching him carefully. Their eyes were wide and bright, a mix of fear and curiosity. They weren't aggressive. They were simply trying to understand what this strange human was doing so close to their mother. He kept his movements slow. He didn't want them to be scared. "It's all right," he said softly, not expecting them to understand his words, but hoping they would hear the calm in his voice. The smallest hatchling tilted its head slightly, as if trying to read his intentions. The mechanic almost smiled. Even in a moment full of uncertainty, their little faces looked innocent and gentle. He turned his attention to the mother dragon's legs. They looked worse up close, swollen, stiff, unbalanced. She must have been in pain for a long time. Maybe days. Maybe more. He didn't know how she had survived this long, but it was clear the hatchlings were the reason. They stayed beside her, keeping her warm, keeping her company, doing whatever little they could. "I'm going to get closer," he murmured, mostly for her comfort. "Just to see. If it hurts, tell me." She blinked slowly. He accepted that as her permission. He moved forward on his knees, not wanting to stand taller than her head. He set his tools down quietly. When he reached her side, the heat radiating from her scales warmed his hands. He had never been so near a dragon before. Her size intimidated him, but the weakness in her body reminded him she wasn't a threat now. She was a mother in need. He reached out with one hand and gently placed it near her injured leg, not touching yet. The mother dragon watched him with steady eyes. When she didn't pull away, he lightly rested his fingers on the swollen area. He didn't press. He just needed to feel the shape. Her breath changed for a moment, not in fear but discomfort. He pulled his hand back immediately, which made her exhale softly, almost as if she appreciated his caution. "Sorry," he whispered. The hatchlings chirped quietly, sensing their mother's uneasiness. One of them tried to climb onto her wing, but she gently nudged it back with her nose. Even in her pain, she stayed gentle with them. The mechanic sat back and thought he couldn't fix broken bones like a healer could, but he could support them, stop them from shifting, keep them from getting worse. That alone could help her stand again someday. Now he looked at the tools he had. Some metal rods, pieces of flat steel, a few strips of cloth, and an old rope. It wasn't much, but he had made machines work with less. If he shaped the metal rods properly, he could make temporary supports, splints strong enough to help her legs stay in place. He looked at the mother dragon again. "I think I know what to do," he said gently. "But it might take some time." She blinked once more, slowly, calmly. He took out a small metal cutter and began shaping one of the rods. He worked carefully, not wanting the loud sounds to startle her. Every now and then he checked the hatchlings. They still watched him closely, sometimes hiding behind their mother, sometimes peeking around her body. They seemed less frightened now, more curious. As he shaped the metal into long, smooth bars, he couldn't help talking quietly. "I know this must be strange for you," he said. "A human fixing a dragon. I didn't wake up today thinking I'd be doing something like this." The mother dragon let out a slow breath, warm enough to stir the dust on the ground. It wasn't a warning. It sounded almost like a tired sigh. Somehow, he took that as a sign she understood a little. When he finished shaping the first metal piece, he showed it to her, not because she needed to approve it, but because he wanted her to know he wasn't hiding anything. She looked at it with heavy eyes, then back at him. He took that as permission to continue. He moved closer to her injured leg, feeling his heart beat a little faster. Even weak, she was powerful. One instinctive movement from her could knock him across the cavern. But he trusted her now. More importantly, she trusted him just enough. He placed the metal support next to her leg and secured it with cloth strips. He worked slowly, making sure he didn't tighten anything too much. Every time she flinched even slightly, he paused. He never wanted to cause her extra pain. The hatchlings watched every move. The smallest one scooted forward, almost touching the metal piece with its nose. The mechanic chuckled softly. "Easy there?" he whispered. "This is for your mother." The little dragon tilted its head, then stepped back behind its siblings. He finished securing the first support and began shaping a second one. This time, the mother dragon didn't tense as much when he touched her leg. She still hurt, but she seemed to understand his hands were trying to help. He talked softly the whole time, not to explain, but simply because silence made the situation feel heavier. "You're doing well," he murmured. "Just a bit more. You're strong. Your little ones need you." The mother dragon blinked slowly, her chest rising and falling in steady breaths. The warmth she released made the air around him comfortable, despite the cold tunnel floor. After a long period of slow, careful work, he placed the second support on her leg and tied it with cloth. He stepped back to look at both pieces. They weren't perfect. They weren't beautiful. But they would help keep her legs steady. They would give her a chance to heal. He looked up at her face. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, of course, but she gently shifted her weight, testing the supports. The hatchlings held their breath. He could almost feel their tiny hopes. The mother dragon didn't cry out. She didn't collapse. She simply tested the new stability, her eyes flicking toward him with something that almost looked like gratitude. The mechanic let out a long breath of relief. He wasn't finished. Not even close. But this was the first step, and it hadn't gone wrong. He moved back and sat near the wall of the cavern to give her space. His legs felt shaky from all the kneeling, and his hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. The hatchlings slowly left their mother's side and approached him. Not too close, but closer than before. Their steps were soft, careful. One of them let out a tiny chirp, almost like a question. He smiled gently. "It's all right," he said. "Your mother's strong. She's going to be okay." The mother dragon watched the scene with tired but calmer eyes. She didn't push the hatchlings away this time. She didn't seem worried. If anything, she looked a little more at ease, now that the first part of the work was done. The mechanic leaned his head back against the rock wall, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle into his bones. He didn't know how long it would take to help her fully. He didn't know if she would ever fully trust him. But he knew he wasn't leaving. Not until she could stand, not until she and her hatchlings could walk out of this canyon safely, not until they had a real chance. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft breathing of the dragon family, the gentle warmth, the quiet safety that slowly filled the cavern. Tomorrow, he told himself he would do more. For now, he stayed with them, silent, steady, and determined to help in whatever way he could. The mechanic woke early the next morning, long before the sun reached the canyon. He didn't wake. because he was rested. He woke because the cavern felt strangely quiet, and his mind was already thinking about what he needed to do next. His back ached from sleeping against the rock wall, but he didn't complain. He had made his choice the moment he decided to help the mother dragon. He wiped dust off his clothes and stretched his sore arms. The air around him was still warm from the dragon's body heat. That warmth made the cavern feel almost like a shelter from the cold outside. When he looked toward the mother dragon, he noticed she was already watching him. Her eyes were calmer today. The pain was still there, as much she could tell, but there was also a different look in her gaze. She no longer seemed unsure of him. If anything, she looked like she expected him to continue helping. The hatchlings lay curled beside her, sleeping in a small pile, their tiny wings tucked close to their round bodies. Every now and then, one of them twitched a foot or stretched its neck, making small noises like soft chirps. He took a moment to breathe in deeply. Today was going to be harder than yesterday. Yesterday, he had only checked her injuries and added temporary supports. Today, he needed to do something more complicated. If he didn't, she would never regain her strength. He stood up slowly and walked over to his small tool bag. It wasn't much, but he had to make it work. He dug through metal scraps, cloth pieces, a few small pliers, and a portable heating tool he used for shaping metal during repairs. He was lucky he had brought that. It would save time and help him make better supports. When he looked at the mother dragon again, she blinked slowly as if telling him she was ready. He walked closer, talking softly so she wouldn't be startled. Today, I'm going to make better supports for your legs. Stronger ones. Ones that won't bend under your weight. She lifted her head just slightly, then lowered it again. The gesture was slow but steady. He approached her left leg first. The metal pieces he had made yesterday were helping, but they were only temporary. They held the bones still, but they weren't strong enough to help her stand. He needed something sturdier, something made from the thick steel bars he had seen earlier outside the tunnel. Before doing anything, he gently touched her leg to check the swelling. She tensed for a brief moment, but didn't pull away. He waited until she relaxed again, then continued his examination. "You're holding up well," he whispered. "Just a little more." The hatchlings woke from their sleep at the sound of his voice. They stretched their wings and blinked sleepily, then waddled closer to see what he was doing. One of them chirped at him as if it remembered him from yesterday. He smiled. "Good morning to you, too." He knew he couldn't work inside the cavern all day. He needed better metal, and he needed tools to heat it and bend it. So he stood up and looked at the mother dragon. "I'll be back soon," he said softly. "Don't worry." She didn't growl or make any warning sound. She simply watched him leave with calm eyes, trusting he would return. He stepped outside into the bright morning sunlight, blinking until his eyes adjusted. The canyon had cooled during the night, but now the sun was warming the stones again. For a moment, he took in the quiet beauty of the place, dust, orange light, long shadows stretching from rock to rock. He walked to the old mining area near the canyon entrance. There were old metal rails, rusted mining carts, broken wheels, and scraps of heavy steel scattered around. Many were too rusted to be useful, but some pieces still had enough strength for what he needed. He searched through piles of metal, picking up pieces and testing their weight. He needed bars thick enough to support the mother dragon's enormous weight, but thin enough for him to shape with his limited tools. It took time, but eventually he found 2 long pieces that he could work with. He set them aside and took out his portable heating tool. It wasn't strong enough to melt steel, but it could soften it enough for bending. He heated the first metal bar, waiting for the dull steel to soften. Once it was ready, he used all the strength in his arms to bend it slowly into a curve that could fit along the dragon's leg. It was exhausting work. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and his arms trembled from the effort. The sun climbed higher, warming the canyon floor, making the air dry and heavy. But he didn't stop every time he felt tired. He remembered the mother dragon's eyes, the quiet trust she had shown him that morning. It was enough to keep him going. After nearly an hour, he shaped the first bar. Then he worked on the second one. By the time he finished, the metal bars were curved smoothly, strong enough to support a weight much heavier than a person's. He carried them back to the cavern, moving slowly because of their weight. When he re-entered the tunnel, the warm air and soft dragon sounds greeted him. The hatchlings were waiting near the entrance, chirping quietly as they saw him return. One of them even stepped closer and sniffed the metal bar he carried. He chuckled. Double quotes. "No, not food," he said softly. "This is for your mother." He walked toward the mother dragon again. She shifted slightly when she saw the heavy metal bars, but she didn't seem afraid. More than anything, she seemed tired of being unable to stand. He could feel her wanting to move, wanting to protect her hatchlings in the way she was meant to. He knelt beside her leg again. "This will take some time," he said softly. "But you're not alone." He placed the first bar along her leg, adjusting it carefully to match the shape of her scales. Then he used thick cloth strips to hold the bar in place, tying them firmly but gently. The mother dragon breathed deeply, her breath warm enough to brush against his arm. He could tell she felt discomfort, but also relief. The hatchlings sat nearby, watching him. They made small noises, sometimes pacing nervously when they saw their mother tense, sometimes pressing close to her side when she relaxed. When the first bar was secured, he moved to the other leg. He repeated the process, shaping the metal, lifting her heavy limbs slightly, and securing the bar with strong cloth wraps. His fingers hurt, and his arms felt heavy, but he kept going. By the time he finished, 2 strong supports were attached to her legs. They were not perfect, but they were steady. They were strong. And most importantly, they would help her stand again someday. He sat back, breathing heavily. "That's it," he whispered. The mother dragon slowly shifted her weight onto the supports. It was cautious, gentle, unsure. The hatchling stepped back, watching her carefully. The cavern became completely silent as she pushed her weight a little more. And then it happened. She managed to lift herself an inch off the ground. Not fully. Not for long. But enough. The hatchlings chirped in excitement, circling around her. The mechanic smiled wide, feeling a warmth in his chest that matched the warmth of the cavern. "You did it," he whispered. "You're getting stronger." The mother dragon lowered herself gently again, but the small lift was enough to show that the supports were working. She would need rest, time, and more care, but the first real step toward recovery had begun. The mechanic stayed with her for a long while, making sure she was comfortable. He gave the hatchlings a bit of water and checked the supports again to ensure they didn't slip. As the day slowly turned into evening, he leaned back against the cavern wall again, exhausted but content. He watched the dragon family rest together, their breathing steady and peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He still had much to do: clean the wounds, adjust the supports, find food, keep them safe. But today, he had given the mother dragon something she desperately needed. Hope. And hope was where healing always began. The mechanic didn't sleep much that night. Even though the mother dragon and the hatchlings were resting quietly, his mind kept turning with thoughts of what he still needed to do. Helping her stand, even for a few seconds, was progress, but it wasn't enough. She needed to move. She needed a safer place. The cavern was too dark, too damp, and too close to the old mining traps that had already hurt her. He leaned against the wall, listening to the soft breathing of the dragon family. The warmth of the mother dragon made the air feel comfortable, almost like a blanket. The hatchlings slept curled into tiny shapes, occasionally stretching or making small noises in their dreams. The sight brought a peaceful feeling to his tired heart, but he knew they couldn't stay there forever. When the first soft light of dawn slipped into the tunnel, he slowly stood up. His muscles felt stiff, and the cold from the stone floor seemed to cling to his bones. He stretched his arms, rolled his shoulders, and quietly walked back to the mother dragon. She opened her eyes as soon as she felt his presence. Her gaze was calmer than the day before. There was still pain, but he could see something new. She wasn't hopeless anymore. She believed he had a plan, and she was waiting for it. The hatchlings woke up soon after, chirping softly and climbing over each other in clumsy excitement. One of them tripped over its own tail, making the mechanic smile despite his exhaustion. He crouched near the mother dragon, keeping his voice gentle. "You're strong enough now to move a little," he said, "but not far, and not without help." The mother dragon blinked slowly, listening. "I want to take you somewhere safer," he continued. "Somewhere with more space, more light, and cleaner ground. I know a place. I used it long ago." He was talking about an old workshop he had built in a larger cave near the canyon's entrance. It wasn't much, but it had enough room for him to store his tools, and he had left a few supplies there. The space was warmer, cleaner, and more comfortable than the cramped mining tunnel. The mother dragon let out a small breath, almost like a sigh, but not a worried one. More like a tired acceptance. He gently checked the supports on her legs. The cloth was still tied firmly, and the metal hadn't shifted too much. She tensed a little when he touched the areas near the broken bones, but she kept still. The hatchlings crowded around him, watching with big, curious eyes. One of them tried to tug at a loose piece of cloth with its tiny mouth, but he gently pushed it away with a smile. "I'll need your help," he said softly to the hatchlings, though he knew they didn't fully understand. Still, they chirped and tilted their heads, as if trying to listen. He moved to the center of the cavern and looked around. He needed something to help the mother dragon move without putting her full weight on her legs. There were old wooden boards from the mining days, and some metal rails he had seen near the entrance. If he combined them, he might be able to make a sled-like platform strong enough to hold her body while he guided her forward. He walked back outside into the bright morning. The rocks glowed orange with the early sun, and the canyon felt quiet but alive. He gathered old boards, dragging them across the ground. He found long pieces of metal rails and cleaned the dust off them. Then he set everything in a flat area near the cave entrance. He worked for hours, cutting, fitting, and tying the pieces together. Sweat ran down his forehead as he hammered nails into the old boards. It wasn't easy work, especially with limited supplies, but his hands moved with purpose. He built a flat platform with metal rails on the bottom, so it could slide across the rocky ground more easily. The entire time, the mother dragon and her hatchlings watched from the cavern. The hatchlings sometimes wandered toward him, curious about the sound of hammering. One of them even tried to climb onto the half-finished platform, making him laugh. Finally, when the sun was much higher in the sky, he wiped his forehead and stepped back to look at his work. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it was strong. Most importantly, it would help him move her safely. He pulled the platform into the cavern slowly. The mother dragon watched it with calm eyes. She didn't move away, which was a good sign. She trusted him enough to let him bring the strange wooden structure closer. He spoke softly again. "All right, we're going to do this slowly. You won't need to walk. You'll only need to shift your body a little." The mother dragon blinked in understanding. He placed the platform beside her and gently guided her to lean her weight onto it. It took time. She had to lift one side of her body, then the other, resting as she went. The hatchlings tried to help in their own small way, pushing with their heads. chirping encouragement, circling around nervously. After many slow minutes, she finally settled onto the platform. Her breathing was heavy from the effort, but she didn't seem panicked. She looked at him with tired but trusting eyes. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Just stay still." He grabbed a long rope he had tied to the front of the platform. He wrapped it around his shoulders and tightened the knot. The weight behind him was enormous. He could feel it even before he took the first step. But he didn't give himself time to think about it. He leaned forward and pulled. Nothing moved at first. The platform was heavy, the dragon even heavier. His boots slipped slightly on the dusty ground. He gritted his teeth, took a breath, and tried again. The platform shifted an inch. The hatchlings chirped in excitement. One of them ran ahead, then ran back as if guiding him. The mother dragon rested her head down, trusting him completely. He pulled again, using all the strength in his legs and arms. The platform scraped against the ground, but moved slowly toward the entrance. The warmth of the cavern faded as they reached the sunlight. The mother dragon squinted slightly, but stayed calm. Each step forward felt like lifting a mountain, but he kept going. Sweat soaked his shirt. His legs trembled. His breath came out in short gasps. But he did not stop. Not once. Every few feet, he rested to catch his breath. The mother dragon waited patiently, never panicking, never shifting. The hatchlings stayed close, chirping encouragement in their tiny voices. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the larger cave entrance, the old workshop. The space was dusty and quiet, but it was much bigger and brighter than the mining tunnel. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the ceiling, giving the room a warm, golden glow. There was an old wooden table, a few metal boxes, and a pile of cloths he had left behind on past visits. He gently pulled the platform inside and guided it to the center of the space. Then he carefully helped the mother dragon shift off the platform so she could rest on the softer sand-covered ground. She lowered herself slowly, giving a deep, exhausted breath. But something in her eyes looked lighter, less trapped, less worried. She was in a safer place now. The hatchlings scrambled around, exploring the new space, chirping excitedly as they sniffed every corner. One of them found an old oil can and knocked it over, making a loud clink that made the mechanic jump. He laughed despite his exhaustion. He sat down heavily, breathing hard, his muscles burning from the long pull. "You all made it," he said softly. "This is better. We can work here." The mother dragon lifted her head just enough to look at him. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the human and the dragon, two beings who should have been worlds apart but had somehow become a team. She closed her eyes slowly, a gesture that looked almost like gratitude. He leaned back against the wall, letting the warm cave air wash over him. The day had been long, difficult, and painful, but it had been worth it. Tomorrow, he would start the next step, cleaning her wounds, strengthening her supports, feeding the hatchlings, and helping the mother dragon rebuild her strength. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of deep, peaceful rest, knowing that he had brought them all one step closer to safety. The morning inside the new cave felt different, softer, warmer. The mechanic opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment he didn't even know where he was. His back hurt from sleeping on the hard ground, but the peaceful sounds around him reminded him why he was there. The hatchlings were already awake. They were moving around quietly, exploring little corners of the workshop. One of them kept pushing a round pebble with its nose, chasing it like it was a toy. Another was staring at an old toolbox, as if trying to figure out whether it could climb inside it. The mother dragon opened her eyes too. She lifted her head just a little, then gently rested it back down. She still looked tired and sore, but there was something softer in her expression now. Maybe it was relief. Maybe trust. Maybe both. The mechanic sat up, rubbing his shoulders. "Good morning," he whispered, even though he knew they didn't understand his words exactly. But they understood his tone. The mother dragon blinked slowly, a calm and gentle response. He stood and walked toward her carefully. The sunlight coming from the cracks above made her scales glow faintly, like ripples of gold and bronze. Her wounds still looked painful, but less angry than before. The supports he had made were holding well. Still, there was a long way to go. He gently placed his hand near one of the supports, checking the knots and metal pieces to see if anything had loosened during the night. She tensed for a moment, but relaxed once she realized he wasn't going to hurt her. He took his time, moving slowly as he worked. He talked softly. Not full sentences, just simple words, warm and reassuring. It wasn't because the dragons needed the explanation, but because speaking calmed him. "You'll be all right," he whispered. "We'll take it slow today. No rushing." After checking the supports, he stepped back and looked around the workshop. He needed food. Not for himself, he could manage, but for the mother dragon and her babies. The hatchlings were already showing signs of hunger, nibbling on bits of cloth and tapping their tiny claws on the ground. He couldn't feed them anything harmful or strange. They needed something natural, something fresh. He remembered a grove near the canyon where thick bushes grew wild berries and sweet leaves. He'd seen the mother dragon eating them once, long before she was injured. It wasn't far, but he would need to go alone. He didn't want to leave them, but they would be safe here for a short time. Before leaving, he knelt near the mother dragon again. "I'll be back soon," he said gently. "Stay calm. Keep the little ones close." She blinked again, slowly, in a way that almost felt like a nod. The mechanic walked out of the cave and into the warm daylight. The air outside felt fresh, and the canyon was quiet, except for the soft sound of wind passing between the rocks. He followed a narrow path along the edge of the cliff, moving quickly but carefully. Every few minutes, he glanced back toward the direction of the cave, as if making sure nothing unexpected was happening behind him. When he reached the grove, he felt a sense of relief. The bushes were full of berries, small, bright, and safe for the dragons. He collected as many as he could, filling an old cloth bag until it felt heavy in his hands. He also cut small branches with soft leaves, the kind he had seen dragons chew when they needed extra strength. On his way back, he walked faster. He felt uneasy being away from them for too long. The canyon was usually safe, but he didn't want to take any risks. They depended on him now, and he couldn't ignore that responsibility. When he reached the workshop entrance again, he stopped and listened. Everything was quiet. No strange noises. No signs of trouble. He stepped inside and saw the hatchlings run toward him immediately. Their little feet tapped against the stone as they chirped excitedly, circling him like tiny shadows. He laughed softly. All right, he said. "Let me put this down first." He placed the cloth bag on the ground and opened it carefully. The smell of fresh berries filled the cave. The hatchlings poked their noses into the bag and began eating with tiny, quick bites. They made soft little sounds of satisfaction, their tails swaying behind them. The mother dragon watched them with warm eyes. The mechanic walked over to her and offered a handful of leaves. She sniffed them first, making sure they were safe, then gently took them from his hand, chewing slowly. He sat beside her, letting the moment be quiet and calm. Caring for them felt natural now, even though he had never imagined himself doing something like this. He had always worked on machines, gears, metal, things without feelings. But these dragons, they trusted him. They needed him. And that changed everything. After some time, he stood up again. There was still a lot to do. Even though the new cave was safer, it wasn't fully ready for the mother dragon to heal properly. The ground needed to be smoother. The air needed better circulation. And the supports on her legs had to be improved if she was ever going to stand again. He searched the workshop for anything useful: old cloth, metal rods, pieces of leather, wooden handles, anything he could use to build better supports. Dust covered most things, but he brushed it off, organizing the materials into small piles. The hatchlings watched him with endless curiosity. Every time he picked something up, one of them would come close to sniff it or tap it with a tiny claw. Eventually, one of them even dragged a small rope toward him, as if trying to help. He smiled. "Thank you," he said. "You're quite helpful." He spent the next several hours crafting new supports. The sound of metal scraping, wood being shaped, and cloth being tied filled the cave. But the dragons didn't seem bothered by the noise. If anything, they seemed calmer hearing him work. Maybe they liked knowing he was nearby. By afternoon, he had built 2 improved supports, stronger, lighter, and more flexible. He approached the mother dragon again carefully. She lifted her head, watching his hands closely. "This might feel strange for a moment," he said, keeping his voice soft, "but it will help you heal." He removed the old support slowly, making sure not to disturb the injured leg too much. The mother dragon winced slightly, but she stayed calm. When he placed the new support around her leg, she exhaled deeply, almost in relief. It fit better, and the weight was more evenly spread. He repeated the process for her other injured area. The hatchlings stayed surprisingly quiet during this part, almost as if they sensed it was important. When he finished, the mother dragon gave a small, tired breath that didn't sound painful, more like comfort. He stepped back and watched her for a moment. "You're doing great," he whispered. "Really great." The sun outside began to lower, sending warm orange light through the cracks in the ceiling. The entire cave glowed gently. The hatchlings curled up together, full and sleepy. The mother dragon rested her head down, looking more peaceful than she had since he first found her. The mechanic finally allowed himself to sit again. His hands ached, his back throbbed, and his clothes were covered in dust and dirt. But he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. He looked at the mother dragon, who gazed back with calm, steady eyes. There was no fear in them anymore, only trust. He didn't know how long it would take for her to fully heal. Days, weeks, maybe more. It didn't matter. He was ready to stay, ready to help, ready to protect the tiny family that had found its way into his quiet life. Outside, the first stars began to appear over the canyon. The night was peaceful, safe. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes, letting the quiet sounds of the dragon family lull him into rest. Tomorrow, they would take another step forward, together. The final morning came quietly, almost too quietly. The mechanic woke up to the soft sounds of the hatchlings moving around the workshop, but something felt different in the air. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the way the sunlight slid through the cracks, warmer than usual. Or maybe it was because deep inside, he knew things were about to change. He sat up slowly and stretched his sore back. For weeks he had slept on blankets and old cloth, never once complaining, because every day with the dragon family had become part of his routine. Now, as he looked toward the mother dragon, he realized how much had changed. She wasn't lying down as she used to. She was sitting up steady, strong, confident. The metal supports he built were holding her weight perfectly. She didn't look weak anymore. She didn't look in pain. Instead, her eyes had that deep glow again, the glow of a creature who belonged to the open skies and tall mountains. One of the hatchlings rushed toward him, bumping into his foot as if demanding attention. Another sat on top of a wooden box, staring at him with bright, curious eyes. The third was sniffing around the tools scattered on the ground. They were full of energy, healthy, and much bigger now. He rubbed their heads gently, laughing softly at their excitement. All right, all right. I'm up, he said. What's all this fuss about? The hatchlings chirped in response, each making a different sound that blended into a strange but sweet melody. They always seemed to talk in their own way, and he had learned to understand the moods behind their sounds. Today, their energy felt different, like they knew something important was going to happen. He stood up and walked toward the mother dragon. She watched him carefully, but not with fear, more like understanding. She lowered her head slightly when he reached her, allowing him to check the supports on her legs one more time. He tightened one of the straps gently. You're healing well, he whispered. Better than I even hoped. She let out a soft breath, almost like a response. It wasn't a growl or a warning. It was gentle, warm, almost thankful. He stepped back slowly, taking in the sight of her. She was ready. Ready in a way he had never seen before. Her wings, once folded tightly against her body from weakness, now stretched slightly, catching the sunlight. Her muscles looked stronger. Her posture more balanced. He knew what this meant. She didn't belong inside a workshop forever. She didn't belong hiding in caves or waiting for help. She was born for open skies, wide space, and freedom. And her hatchlings deserved that too. But knowing something is right doesn't make it easier. He took a slow breath and looked around the cave one more time. This place had become their home for a while. A strange, unexpected home filled with tools, dust, and the soft sounds of dragon wings. A place where fear turned into trust, and trust turned into something even deeper. He could almost feel the memories hanging in the air. He walked outside to check the weather. The sky was clear and bright. The wind was soft and warm. A perfect day for something new. When he came back inside, the mother dragon was already trying to stand fully. The hatchlings gathered around her, chirping as if encouraging her. She braced herself and pushed up, her wings spreading slightly to balance her weight. He watched with both pride and fear. She took her first. Strong step, steady, controlled, then another. She wasn't struggling anymore. She wasn't collapsing or trembling. She was walking. He felt something tighten in his chest. Look at you, he whispered, not sure whether he was talking to her or to himself. You did it. The hatchlings ran around her happily, bumping into her legs and wings. She nudged them gently, guiding them closer. It was clear she was preparing them for something too. When the mechanic approached her again, she leaned down and touched her forehead lightly against his chest. It was so unexpected that he froze for a moment. Dragons never did that unless they trusted deeply. And this wasn't just trust. It was gratitude, connection, a goodbye without words. He placed his hand on her head gently, feeling the warm scales beneath his fingers. You're welcome, he whispered. You don't have to say anything. I know. The hatchlings came closer and circled him in their own small goodbye. One tugged at his sleeve. Another climbed onto his boot. The third pressed its little head against his hand. He knelt and hugged them, not tightly, not in a way that would scare them, but gently enough for them to feel the warmth of the moment. You're all going to be amazing out there, he murmured. Stay close to your mother. Stay safe. And don't forget what you learned here. He didn't know if they understood every word, but they understood the feeling. After a long moment, he stood up and stepped back so the mother dragon could walk toward the cave entrance. The hatchlings followed her, their little wings fluttering with excitement, as sunlight poured into the cave as she approached the opening. She paused for a moment, taking in the vast view of the canyon she had been separated from for so long. The wind brushed past her wings gently, as if welcoming her back. The mechanic stood behind her, watching quietly. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't call out. He simply watched, letting the moment unfold naturally. She spread her wings fully wide, beautiful, powerful. The metal supports on her legs caught the sunlight, shining like streaks of silver. The hatchlings spread their wings too, much smaller but filled with hope and energy. Then, with one strong movement, she lifted herself off the ground. The sound of her wings filled the canyon, deep and steady. The hatchlings followed her, fluttering their wings until they rose beside her, wobbling at first, but quickly finding balance. The mechanic watched them soar into the open sky, feeling something warm and painful and beautiful all at once. They flew higher and higher, the metal braces glinting like stars in daylight. The hatchlings circled around their mother, chirping joyfully, their shapes growing smaller as they climbed. The mother dragon looked down at him one last time before turning toward the mountains. It wasn't a long look, just a brief moment, but it said, "Everything. Thank you. We will never forget." And then they disappeared beyond the cliffs. The canyon grew quiet again. The wind carried their distant calls for a moment, then faded. The mechanic stood alone at the entrance of the cave, staring at the sky long after they were gone. His heart felt heavy, but not in a sad way. More like a weight made of memories precious, irreplaceable. He walked back into the workshop slowly. Everything was still there. The tools, the ropes, the blankets, the marks on the ground where the hatchlings used to play. It all felt different now, like an empty room after laughter fades. But he didn't feel lonely. He felt proud. He felt grateful. He felt changed. He touched the metal. Scraps on the table, the same pieces he had used to build the supports that saved the mother dragon. They were just tools, just ordinary objects. But now they carried a story he knew he would never forget. Later that night, as the stars filled the sky, he sat outside the cave and watched the horizon. He wondered where the dragon family was now. Maybe gliding above the mountains. Maybe resting near a waterfall. Maybe teaching the hatchlings how to fly stronger, higher, safer. He smiled at the thought. Some stories don't need words. Some bonds don't need promises. Sometimes, helping someone heal becomes the greatest journey of all. And he knew, if he ever heard the sound of dragon wings again, or saw a flash of silver supports against the sky, he would remember this chapter of his life forever. The night air was calm. The sky was endless. And somewhere out there, a dragon family soared free because one quiet mechanic chose kindness over fear. And that was enough.